Hi everyone, Jeff from Anatomy and You, back for another episode of Anatomy Memory Tips and Tricks. If you've been watching these videos so far, you might be asking yourself, when is the right time to use a memory trick? Well, there are a couple ways I can answer this. One thing I could say is that you should use memory tips and tricks whenever you can. But another more specific answer is that if you've been reading about a subject or looking at a diagram over and over again and you can't seem to remember or retain the information, that's a time when you should definitely use a memory trick. I found myself in a situation like this when I came up with the memory tip that I'll be talking about today, which deals with blood vessels. Another point I want to demonstrate is that I mentioned a couple weeks ago that memory tips should relate to things that you find interesting, and this will make it easier for them to stand out in your mind. I personally love travel and I have an interest in geography, and so today's memory trick has a geographic component to it as well. So before we get to our memory tip, let's talk a little bit about blood vessels. When we learn the blood vessels of the body, we usually start with arteries before learning the veins, and there are a couple reasons for this. For one thing, we're generally more interested in which vessels supply an organ with oxygenated blood as opposed to which vessels drain that organ. On top of that, the network of arteries is more simple than the network of veins. Arteries are essentially found in one layer, whereas with veins we have both superficial and deep veins. Now, the deep veins tend to run in parallel with the arteries, so if we know the name of the artery, then we'll know the name of the corresponding deep vein. It's when we get into the superficial veins that things get a little more tricky. Now, as the name implies, superficial veins are visible through the skin, and some places where you can see these are on the back of your hand, the top of your foot, and your forearm. The function of these veins is to aid the body in thermoregulation and also to assist the deep veins in bringing blood back to the heart. Now, the main superficial veins of the leg are the great saphenous and small saphenous veins. Because the names are so similar and descriptive, I didn't have too much trouble learning them. But where I ran into trouble was learning the main superficial veins of the arm, the basilic and the cephalic veins. So let's take a look at the vasculature of the arm before we move on to our memory tip. So as you can see on this beautiful and totally anatomically correct drawing, the main artery of the upper arm is the brachial artery, which is a continuation of the axillary artery, which is itself a continuation of the subclavian artery. Now, around the elbow, the brachial artery splits into the radial and ulnar arteries. And we can see the pattern is very similar with the deep veins, and the main deep vein of the upper arm is the brachial vein. But it's flanked on either side by these two superficial veins, the basilic and the cephalic. Unlike the brachial vein, these veins run all the way from the hand up to the shoulder. So, which side of the brachial vein does each one go on? This is what I had so much trouble remembering, until I came up with today's memory tip. Let's list out the names of the veins, and brachial should be in the middle because the brachial vein is found in between the other two. So when I write them out like this, we see that the words have the initials B, B, C. Now, when I hear these initials, I think of the British Broadcasting Corporation, public television for our friends in the UK. But how can I use this to help me remember which vein is found on either side of the brachial vein? Could be BBC like this, or it could be BBC like that. Which one is it? Well, now I'm going to show you the method that I came up with that finally allowed me to tell the difference between the two. Alright, so when we look at a world map the way it's normally shown, we see that the US is on the left and the UK is on the right. Now, going back to our diagram of the body, I associate the UK with the right side, or the left arm of the person. And since I associate the UK with the BBC, this is the arm where the veins spell out BBC. So basilic is medial, cephalic is lateral. So now you may be saying something like, Jeff, that seems like a lot of steps to go through just to remember two veins. But remember what I said before. Anytime you find yourself in a situation where you're stuck and you can't remember, that's when you should be using a memory trick. And the great thing is that once you come up with a great memory trick that works for you, you'll never forget it. And that was the situation I found myself in until I came up with the memory trick that I just showed you. So that's our memory tip for today. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe to my channel. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at @anatomyandyou. And as always, if you want to talk about anything in or on the body, stop by my website, anatomyandyou.com. Thanks, and see you next time.